Welcome to Coleman Report Live. I'm Bob Coleman, and we're talking Main Street, the small business lenders who help it grow. John Reosti, American banker, specialist, small business lending sector. John, great to have you. I appreciate you coming on. You're our man in Washington. There's a lot going on. I'm going to let you talk. I don't know where you want to start, but let's start with the direct lending. I've got a lot of comments on that. There's a lot of lenders who aren't happy within the budget that the Biden administration wants to let the government back into the 7A direct lending business. Go ahead, John. Tell us about that.
Well, this is not new. This is the second time. This is the second time around, if you want to quote song lyrics, for this idea that came up as part of the 2022 budget, and it was a different format. This time around, what is different is the SBA doesn't need quite as much approval to go forward with this. They do need at least one approval from Congress. I think that is on being able to raise the interest rates on some of the loans. But if they can get that, everything else falls into place, because in their the way they put this together, and I don't want to use the word scheme because that is I'm not necessarily saying negative or positive, but in their plan of operation, they believe they can do this at zero subsidy, and they already have they have the authority to do direct lending. They've always had it.
Right.
It's just that, given their record in the past, and I mean pre-COVID, when they were doing regular loans directly, it was a good thing. They moved. The program has succeeded better, has performed better in this current model where banks handle the lending. But they want to bring it back, and of course the reason is that the administrators articulated is what she says is, she used the term market gaps, persistent market gaps at the smaller end of the spectrum. Getting more in direct lending would be the tool to get more capital to underserved groups that are not being sufficiently served now, even though it has to be said that the money going to these groups, to African Americans, to veterans, to women, it's all on the increase, significant increase. And I'm not talking about just small little jumps, significant increases over the past 2 or 3 years. So, if you want to credit that to the pressure and the visibility that she has brought, then you can do that. And you have to ask the question, well, why mess with success? But the way they have articulated, or the way they've designed the program, is they would increase the average, the maximum, rather. I'm sorry, I said average, but they increase the maximum loan size to $7.5 million from the current $5 million. As I understand it, the revenue that is brought in from making more profitable, larger loans would then fund this direct lending initiative, which would boost the smaller end of the scale. So they would become a little bit more top heavy in one respect, but that would provide the revenue for the agency to devote more cash to small dollar loans, and the bank certainly would be encouraged to continue their small dollar lending.
And there's a lot in there. Number one, this all is contingent on what Congress wants to do. I don't see that Congress passing direct lending this year. Obviously, they're going to raise it every year. But I've gotten a lot of comments about raising the cap up to 7.5. Is there support in Congress for that?
It's hard to say. I mean, I'm not sure the Congress, at least last week when this all came down, was fully aware of this. Obviously, the Biden administration was, and it was part of the budget. But the budget is enormous. There's a lot going on in the world.
Yeah.
I think certainly it will become controversial as they become more aware. And you have this sort of logical issue. an agency that is pressed repeatedly and aggressively for more small dollar lending is now advocating a significant increase in the maximum loan size. $7.5 million loans are big loans, and that's beginning. You could make an argument that's beginning to push SBA, the Small Business Administration, into mid-sized lending.
And that always goes back to the argument: what is a small business? They have less than 500 employees. Well, that's mid-size, obviously.
Yeah, I believe at one point during her testimony, and there were 2 hearings, so there was a lot of testimony that the administrator gave. She said that if the SBA simply indexed the loan size to inflation, they would be at or perhaps even above 7.5 million. But it's as it stands, it's been there for quite a few years, and that is sort of one of the linchpins of the proposal.
Help me out with my history. The 5 million came in 2008.
I couldn't tell you the exact year, I'm afraid.
But it came during the Great Recession. It came out of the Great Recession.
And the interesting thing is, one of the administrators' criticisms of banks is that they gravitated towards those larger, more profitable loans.
Well, come on. Yeah.
And yet the loan size would go to 7.5 million. But
you raise an interesting point, which is the larger loans tend to perform better. The bankers very much are doing their due diligence on those larger size loans. They certainly have a lot of skin in the game.
Yes.
And the tax of splitting the secondary market premium with the agency or the government, if anything over 110, the tax on those loans goes into the subsidy, and the subsidies does fund those smaller loans, which in no criticism, they have higher loss rates. And I don't think anybody criticizes those micro lenders or the CDCs who specialize in those loans in that market. Everyone understands, hey, we're going to have higher losses, and that's okay because the losses are certainly manageable and they're being paid for.
Right. I did in talking to sources, one of the themes that came out in a couple of the discussions I had, and I want to sort of save the exact names and quotes for a later story, but one of the themes that came out is, if this is such an important concern of yours, and no one is saying that it shouldn't be an important concern of yours, why not create a second program? Move it. Define what small dollar loans are, give it its own funding source, and if you want to do direct loans, do it that way. Don't necessarily mix it up with SBA, because there's program integrity issues as well. If this goes in the direction that they want it to go, they'd make perhaps a lot of small dollar loans, and a lot of increased loan losses down the line.
Well, you put me down as a yes in that category. I talked to a lot of my CDC friends who now have the licenses to make those smaller loans, and they're willing to do that. But they note that they're being, on one hand, SBA wants them to do it, but the other hand, they have these Paris scores that are out of whack, above average on their peers for higher loan losses, and they're saying there's a disconnect. They want us to make these loans. We want to make the loans. By definition, we are mission-driven lenders. We want to go to those underserved markets, but you can't compare us with a Live Oak Bank with average loan size 800,000. John, you know that better than me.
Even higher. Yeah.
Yeah. And with a very excellent portfolio, and good for Live Oak Bank and good for the CDCs and that do this, but there's that huge disconnect. So on the surface, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting question, and it also doesn't escape my notice that connecting this to another issue that for a while was a concern of small businesses, but it seems to have been resolved, and that's this question of whether the IRS was going to allow access to tax transcripts. that issue has been sort of smoothed out. But it remains that these are small businesses, very small businesses, that don't have the sort of documentation and
sophistication
that the larger ones do, and banks can better assess those larger ones, and this isn't true of every lender that sort of emphasizes a small dollar space, but some of the ones that do it the most successfully, and I'm talking about TD, I'm talking about Huntington, M&T, are banks with enormous branch networks, right, and a lot of infrastructure that they can bring to bear in underwriting these loans, and
they know their customer.
And they know that
these people come. They see these people come in and make the deposits, and
they
shop. They shop at their
the
banker shop locally. Yeah,
hundreds and hundreds of branches, and CDCs. They don't have that, so they're going to have to develop a new and different model to hopefully arrive at the same result.
I'd like your opinion about the new SBLC licenses. You don't have to comment if you don't want to. But there were 3 licenses that were issued: Alaska Growth, Arkansas Capital, and Funding Circle. These were specifically granted to go after those underserved markets. Arkansas Capital, rural America. Alaska, native, Alaska small businesses. Funding Circle has failed to make 1.7A loan. They got a license, and now they're going to sell it. Any comment?
Well, they this is an issue with you have to go back to SBA and whether it's legitimate or not to question their the judgment of the choices.
In my opinion, you don't have to do that. I know. I can.
In 2 of the 3, I don't think there's any problem with those. But with Funding Circle, they haven't even approved. I mean, you say Funding Circle hasn't started lending yet. There's a good reason for that. They haven't been approved yet, at least as of last week. Events could have overtaken me, and I know that both SBA and Funding Circle said that they were very, very close to getting the approval and beginning. So I apologize to Funding Circle if I'm a little bit behind the curve, but I'm not that far behind the curve, and it has taken SBA a lot longer to approve Funding Circle than it did the other 2. And now you have the issue, and this isn't this is decisions that were being made in London by the senior Funding Circle management. You have the issue that they're not as invested in the United States.
They're pulling out of the market,
SBA, as they were.
Well, they got the license. The license is worth about $5 million. So now the question is, are they going to sell that for $5 million, or SBA going to block that? I mean, SBA they have a mess on their hands. And I guess when I asked you, John, I didn't follow the hearings. Did that come up in the congressional hearings last week?
It came up.
Summarize that real quick.
Big time. Well, one of the positions that was taken generally by Republican lawmakers is the one that you just articulated, that you have an agency that I won't say went out on a limb, but definitely went out and hand selected this organization for this very valuable license, and it's maybe you can make an argument that it seems to have blown up in their faces because of these decisions that were made across the Atlantic Ocean. So that SBA and even Funding Circle US didn't necessarily have total control over.
And I'll go along with that. I agree with you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
But Funding Circle itself, and I had a chance to talk to one of their spokespeople, said that number one, they're still invested in this, and that no decisions have been made on a sale of the license.
Correct.
Or of Funding Circle US. I mean, it has been, there are rumors. There are rumors that I don't think there are rumors. I guess Funding Circle has come out and said they've received inquiries. That's the word.
Oh, they quoted, the CEO's quoted saying,
absolutely.
"We want to get out of America small business lending." Yeah, she's quoted that way.
She's quoted, and that they've received inquiries, and so theoretically a sale, not just of the license is possible, of the whole operation, of the portfolio, and that's 6 months or 3 or 6 months after SBA has taken these very important decisions and gone down this road, and now they're at before they've even had the chance to book a loan, they're at this very sort of difficult spot. I mean, it's a difficult spot for everybody. So we will have to see what goes forward, but as things stand, Funding Circle is saying they're ready to go forward once the approval is made, and that even at the minimum level, which they have to, even if they're only given the minimum amount of capital to proceed with, that still gives them the resources to make about $50 million of
well, they got, if they want SBA ever to sign off on that approval, they better show that they could sell some loans. I mean, that's
yes.
I mean, if they. I'll leave it at that. Hey, my last comment on this, and I would have lost money on this bet, John. SBA's budget hovers around $1 billion. Chair Gene Sheehan from Maine, Senate Chair, wants to increase that to $1.4 billion. I didn't know we were still that small. And if you think about it, for a government agency to do what they do and the positive impact to the economy and to Main Street for $1.4 billion this is textbook positive story. If you have to pick one government agency that's doing its job, put me down as a yes on that. I mean, those are amazing numbers, and I don't see any issue in getting those approved. Do you, John?
No. The question is, where will the money be allocated? It's another sort of SBA is walking into another controversy. They've built this navigators program, and they have a lot of faith in it, and they want to expand it, and they feel that it is a crucial component in that plan, that overall plan, to get more money to the underserved small businesses. But in doing that, there's been, I think, definitely some de-emphasis of the existing network of the not just of the field offices, but of the small business development centers. And those are programs as small as they are, that have a lot of support and backing in Congress, that you could say that they're Main Street programs. They're tangible, places where people can interact with the SBA business people and get advice and technical assistance. And, the agency wants to use the Navigator program, to sort of, I don't want to say replace, because they haven't X'd out those budget lines, but a lot of the new resources that they're asking for have gone to navigators and not to the more traditional centers.
There's always nipping at the heels of of numbers and special pet projects, and that will all be sorted out. But in terms of high level numbers and high level programs, this is still an extremely successful program. It's not going away. And I think what this proves is lenders are very much doing their job on making good loans, and SBA has done a decent job in rooting out the rogue actors. Especially, you can see the PPP fraud, and they're getting a lot better on moving a lot quicker on going after rogue lenders as well. So anyway,
I'll mention really quick one indicator of how deep the support for SBA is in Congress is the majorities that the House has passed. I think it's called the Invest in Main Street Act, involving small business investment, SBIA. Right. SBIAs. All the
SBICs.
Well, no, not the SBICs, but the ones that can invest, make equity investments in companies. So these are SBIA, Small Business Investment. I can't remember what the A stands for, but they make equity investments. And under the current sort of law and status, banks can only invest 5% of their capital in these, and it's the one avenue that most banks, including most community banks, have to make any type of equity investment. The bill would allow banks to invest up to 15%, which the regulators have already moved in that direction. It's the law, the existing law, the small. I forget the law. It's the SB. Anyway, it's the law that was enacted in 1958. Only is restricted to restricts them to 5%. So this 1958 law on the books, restricts banks to 5% investment. This change would triple it. Nobody's against it anywhere.
Right.
It just never passes. So it has passed the House. And the final margin, it got over 400 votes. That's
I was going to say, 90%.
Yeah,
support.
It was just introduced in the Senate. This is the third Congress that has considered this bill. I think this is about the furthest it's gotten. So it's passed the House a number of times. It's now introduced in the Senate. It's in committee and it's languishing there. And it will be interesting to see if the Senate can move and do something on this, but it does to make a short point long-winded. It does indicate the depth of support that the program has.
Well, very good, John. I really appreciate you coming on, talking to our audience. Let's get you on next month, and thank you everyone for joining us today for Coleman Report Live and for supporting America's Main Street, an entrepreneur at a time.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.